Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. Let me open this plenary session. I would be doing it not myself, I'm just alone on a podium, but with my two colleagues, Dr. Minoko Takanashi and Professor Nell Chow, who would be pre-recorded and deliver their speeches later on. Usually we present scientific challenges. We're discussing economical, social issues which influence our work. But today it's a special session because we're discussing something unusual and covering a topic of banking and transplantation in time of crisis, natural disasters, war, and other main calamities. Today, me and my colleagues will discuss how to deal with those issues and how to successfully cope with them. When it comes to natural disasters, we have early warning system, we have special protocols, and more or less know how to deal with it. Humanity has already learned how to predict and how to cope with problems caused by these things. But change happened and the world became a more dangerous place. Of course, we have cases of nuclear disasters, we have wars, unfortunately, in this world. And now we're not discussing only weather change, ambiguity is weather forecast, but also changes made by human brought in this world with war and suffering. Somehow, topics of this session intersect and support each other. I like to remind that the first massive nuclear disaster happened in Chernobyl, on Chernobyl nuclear station, which happened to be nowadays Ukraine, some 36 years ago. And it's happened, and it's followed by disaster on the Fukushima nuclear plant in 2018. Today, our colleague Dr. Minoko Takanashi would present her experience, and she has more than 30 years experience as a Japanese Red Cross official, dealing with cord blood bank regulation, coordinating transplant centers, and she would discuss and would present how disaster happened, caused by earthquake first, by triggered by tsunami later on, and she would be discussing and presenting this issue today. Presentation, please.
I am Minoko Takanashi from the Japanese Red Cross Blood Service. Soon after I began working there 30 years ago, I started their first cord blood bank. Cord blood transplants now make up over half of the unrelated stem cell transplantations in Japan. And Japan now does by far the most cord blood transplants in the world. Today, I am going to present our experience in the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. This is a map of the Earth's tectonic plates. The Eurasian plate, Pacific plate, North American plate, and Philippine Sea plate all meet under or near Japan. Earthquakes are common in Japan. We are educated to protect ourselves. For example, to fix the furniture to the wall so that it doesn't fall over when there is a strong earthquake. Frequently updated building regulations make new houses and other buildings stronger. Also, we are reminded to keep a stock of emergency supplies to last at least 3 days, such as food, water, and flashlights. When I searched for the historical record of the largest magnitude earthquakes on this website, the U.S. Geological Survey, the March 2011 earthquake appeared. The 2011 East Japan earthquake was the strongest on record for Japan, and it shook most of the country. I was at work at the Tokyo Blood Center, about 350 kilometers from the epicenter, as the largest blood center in the world at the time, and from my window watched an elevated highway waving, hoping that a tanker truck that I could see would be able to stay on that highway. The Tokyo Blood Center building was built in 2006, close to the sea on reclaimed land. It was built using a seismic isolation base after hardening the ground. The building is on columns with rubber cushions, so during the earthquake, the whole building moved horizontally, but with less force and movement than the ground was moving, and nothing fell off the shelves and desks in this building. At the blood center's previous location on a hillside in Tokyo, the mechanical systems were in the basement. To avoid them being disabled by flooding at its new location near the sea, they were installed on the top floor. When the earthquake struck, the testing machines at the blood center stopped automatically as designed, since they needed to drop reagents and samples precisely into a small space. It was a Friday afternoon, and the commuter trains also stopped, so the blood center workers were advised to stay overnight at work. The regional blood center in Miyagi, near the epicenter of the earthquake, suffered a lot. It was far enough from the coast to avoid the tsunami, and the building is only 4 stories high. It was built with seismic-resistant structure in 2008. But the huge testing machines shifted. The drainage pipe for the blood testing machines was found broken in between floors, and a platelet bag shaker had fallen over. Blood testing and production was stopped for about 40 days after the Great East Japan earthquake. The earthquake caused a tsunami of at least 15 meters in height, with a run-up height of up to 40 meters. The run-up height is how high up hills above sea level the tsunami reached. It reached to the top of 3- and 4-story buildings because of the landscape in this area. We saw houses in the sea and boats on the land. The tsunami washed away many things, and some of the debris drifted across the ocean to the Americas. The tsunami damaged the Fukushima nuclear power plant, resulting in the meltdown of 3 nuclear reactors and the release of radioactive materials, which continues to this day. The WHO has a 2011 earthquake page, as it had so much of an effect not only in Japan, but worldwide. The earthquake destroyed old buildings and the tsunami washed away coastal towns. What also affected the surviving people was the loss of utilities and the availability of food and medicine. For the first few days, supplies could not be delivered to the area. The nuclear disaster added confusion and made the rescue and recovery effort more difficult. The Fukushima nuclear reactors melted down when the tsunami flooded the low-lying power generators and electricity switching units placed in the basement of the reactor buildings, which was built at the edge of the coast, on ground they first lowered from 30 meters above the sea level to just 10 meters. Most of the nuclear power plants in Japan are near the sea. Because of the Fukushima disaster, all of the nuclear power plants in the country were stopped, and we managed without electricity from them for years. Most of the radioactive material released from the Fukushima reactors has short half-lives. In some of the areas that were significantly affected, the contamination has become quite low nowadays. Now, I will talk about the cord blood bank in Miyagi. The Miyagi cord blood bank was in the city of Sendai, which is in the prefecture of Miyagi. It was not part of the Japanese Red Cross, but run by hematologists of Tohoku University Hospital. It took 2 days before we in Tokyo learned of the workers' safety via a private cell phone email. These pictures are from right after the earthquake. In big earthquakes, things tend to fly from the shelves and cabinets even if they stay standing. Just after the earthquake, the building that the cord blood bank office was situated in was closed to check the safety of the building. Electronics, like PCs, telephones, and fax machines, which need wiring, could not be moved. They had to stop processing cord blood too. The liquid nitrogen tanks that store cord blood units had been tied together as a precaution for earthquakes. Tied together, the tanks shifted on casters on the floor, but they did not fall. We use vapor-phase liquid nitrogen containers for cord blood units transiently until all the infectious markers and bacterial fungal culture tests prove negative. As the amount of liquid nitrogen is small compared to liquid phase tanks, it needs a frequent resupply of liquid nitrogen. The resupplying was stopped because of the blackout, but resumed working after 24 hours. The liquid nitrogen was added to the tank automatically, which was 12 hours later than scheduled, but the temperature stayed within the required range. The liquid nitrogen supply system was outside of the processing rooms. There was no damage to the containers, the connecting pipes, nor the air conditioning pipes. Amazingly, the liquid nitrogen supply was maintained as usual, twice a week on Mondays and Fridays. There was no damage to the liquid nitrogen supply tubes, nor inside of the cell processing units. This is their summary of the earthquake. The workers were okay. They needed to contact their families and take safety measures for the workplace and for their families. Because of the outage of all utilities and services, they could not communicate with outside organizations for 2 days. we decided to exclude their cord blood units from our donor search system. The building in which their office situated was closed for 3 weeks. Electricity was restored after 1 day. Water was restored after a week. Gas took 3 weeks to be restored. But they continued to work to resume the functioning of the cord blood bank. When the utilities were restored, the local services began to recover. They are back to the work in April. One of the testing sites was the Miyagi Blood Center, which took more than a month to resume functioning. At the end of April, they restarted the processing and cryopreservation of cord blood. The logistics between the affected area and outside areas suffered a lot. The severely affected area was cut off from the outside, literally. Local people made long lines at gas stations to buy a few liters of gas. The remaining highways were allowed to be used only by permission, which was given to rescue operations and the Red Cross. The roads were damaged and had no lighting at night. The blood center in Tokyo sent out teams of workers with blood products, sleeping bags, and a week's worth of food and water to be self-sufficient each week for several weeks. These logistical problems meant that the Miyagi cord blood bank could not send their cord blood units to other parts of Japan. So we could not include their units in our search system. One of my relatives lives in Sendai, and she happened to be on an island in south part of Japan when the earthquake happened. The Sendai airport was closed and the train station was closed. She could not go back home for a few weeks. At that time, there were 11 cord blood banks in Japan. From 2010, the smaller banks had begun to consider to close. Miyagi Cord Blood Bank was also a small bank and had economical difficulties to operate. They eventually decided to close in March 2012. The cryopreserved units were then moved to the Hokkaido Red Cross Cord Blood Bank and re-registered in the donor search system. There was a further consolidation up to 2014, resulting in 6 cord blood banks. This figure is the number of cord blood units in the search system from each bank in Japan. We had 5 mergers and organizational changes when the new law for the unrelated stem cell transplantation came into effect in 2014. The marked part of 2010 is a unit by Miyagi Cord Blood Bank. As the mergers resulted in excluding units with small cell numbers, and we keep units for 10 years from collection, those transferred units from closed banks are disappearing. This is a photo taken inside the transplant unit of the Miyagi Prefectural Cancer Center, just after the earthquake. It is inland, just enough so they did not suffer from the tsunami. But Miyagi is the closest prefecture to the epicenter of the earthquake. The water pipes broke, resulting in the flooding of the 6th floor, and transplant unit was in the 6th floor. When the earthquake happened, there were 5 patients in isolation rooms. They were moved to regular rooms. 4 patients were undergoing chemotherapy, and their white blood cell counts began to rise. 1 patient had received cord blood 2 days before the earthquake. The cord blood transplantation succeeded. The clean rooms needed repairs and validations and took more than half a year to reopen. There was a patient scheduled to soon receive a cord blood transplant. He was admitted to another hospital, the Sendai Medical Center, and received the cord blood transplantation as planned. The Sendai Medical Center was a triage medical center at the time. They also suffered with blackouts, water system trouble, and aftershocks. To transport cord blood units to the affected area was another problem. Normally, for short distances, an individual carries the unit from the bank to the hospital by car. For long distances, we use flights by way of a contracted delivery company. The cord blood is taken by car by the delivery company to and from the airport. For middle distances, such as between Tokyo and Miyagi, an individual carries the unit via the high-speed train. But both the high-speed train tracks and the Miyagi airport were damaged by the earthquake and the tsunami. As neither the high-speed train nor the airport in Sendai were available, the only method of transportation in March was by driving all the way. We considered to use a special rescue unit of our blood center for delivery from Tokyo to Sendai, but the highway was reopened for public use in time. Another cord blood unit that needed to be sent to Sendai from the city of Fukuoka in western Japan had to be sent to the hospital using 2 flights, first to Tokyo and then to Yamagata in the northwest, from where it went by car. This was because of the cancellation of direct flights from Fukuoka to Yamagata. In the affected area, there were 43 bone marrow and PBSC donors who had already been selected for unrelated transplants at the time of the earthquake and tsunami. They were all confirmed safe. But for 2 cases, a cord blood transplant was done because of the difficulty of continuing the coordination for a bone marrow transplant or a peripheral blood stem cell transplantation. This is the last slide. Earthquakes are common in Japan. In 2011, most of the lives lost were from the tsunami. The disruption of utilities and services and loss of communication were serious. The building regulations, which had upgraded the strength of newly built houses and buildings before the earthquake were effective. The buildings that collapsed were the older ones. General education for people to prepare and protect themselves is important. Thank you for listening.
Next, our colleague, Professor Nelson Chow, who is specialized in immunology and pathology in Duke University and is the chief department of cellular therapy and bone marrow transplant. He would present and elaborate on radiation injury treatment network and establish uniform protocol to cooperate and coordinate transplant centers and other participants involved to help someone in need. Presentation, please.
Good morning. Thank you for this kind invitation to talk about the Radiation Injury Treatment Network. I am sorry that I'm not there in person. The Radiation Injury Treatment Network is a national network of medical centers with expertise in the management of bone marrow failure and works with partners from other medical specialties to assist in the management of acute radiation syndrome and its health-related consequences. The mission is to maximize health-related outcomes among casualties with ARS following a mass casualty disaster involving radiological, nuclear, or chemical agents with marrow toxicity. So our mission really is to develop guidelines before the disaster, during the disaster to provide comprehensive evaluation, and after to collect data so we can learn from any of these events. So the outline is we're going to talk a little bit about radiation, a little bit about the concept of operations, what the RTN does, what are we doing, and where we're going to go. So just very quickly, there are three basic types of radiation. Alpha particles, which are quite weak, which are stopped by a sheet of paper. Beta particles, which are a little more potent, but are again not very penetrating. And most of the events really going to be about gamma rays, which is it takes concrete or lead to actually stop that radiation. So the acute radiation syndromes we think about primarily in the bone marrow. We think about cutaneous injury, gastrointestinal injury, cardiovascular, and central nervous system. And it's the level is really dependent on the dose. So you can have whole body or part of the body, and depending on the type of radiation, it can be exposure within seconds, minutes to hours. And the hours would be something like fallout. And most of the injury really is due to death of stem cells in the body and the inability to regenerate damaged cells. And there are really limited options at this point and no preventative pharmaceutical. So the types of injury are primarily, as one would expect in the case of an improvised nuclear device, would be traumatic blast injuries, burn injuries. And when we talk about what we try to do is we try to focus on primarily radiation injuries and then some around the combined trauma and burn with radiation. It's important to remember that the addition of trauma or burns to radiation dramatically increases the severity of the event to the patient. There's flash blindness that can occur, and obviously a tremendous amount of mental health effects. So in the acute radiation subsyndromes, we think of the bone marrow, and that's where most of our work has been. There's a cutaneous syndrome, which is really primarily around touching radioactive sources with burns. There's a gastrointestinal subsyndrome, which is quite damaging and can be certainly fatal. And then the cardiovascular central nervous system is really not probably survivable if they develop that. So there are medical countermeasures which have been stockpiled. So for acute radiation syndrome, primarily around the hematopoietic system, filgrastim, pegfilgrastim, sargramostim, and romiplostim have all been FDA approved for emergency use. And these have improved survival in patients who are acutely exposed to radiation. And the approval is based on the 2-animal rule by the FDA, which requires 2 mammals with known mechanisms to show survival advantage. There's no requirement for EUA. Now these are approved if it's used as the drug label. And you can actually find this full list under the BARDA medical countermeasures. So what the modelists think is, from one of these improvised nuclear devices, is there's an epicenter, of course, and that's really a complete devastation of the buildings. And obviously nobody would be expected to survive that. There's moderate building damage, roads are passable, there's perhaps some potential survival, and then about 3 miles out, there would be windows and doors blown out. And probably the majority of patients here who have not had any significant trauma or burns would be in the potentially survivable range. And this is from a 10 kiloton improvised nuclear device. So the major event of such a explosion really would be fallout. So the plume would reach many miles into the air, and dependent on prevailing winds would carry this level of radioactivity downwind. And this leads to scatter of the fallout over a few hours. And this radiation really does represent a direct health threat. So the major public health support for such an event really is what's called shelter in place. So if you can get to the basement of a building and stay there while this fallout plume is going over and scattering radiation, you will be protected from it. Whereas if you try to get in your car and drive out into this plume, it could be significantly worse. So the good things about fallout is it really does decay very quickly. It's generally not an inhalation hazard, and you can really protect yourself by sheltering. So you can see on the right-hand side, in a single-family home or school building or apartment, there are lots of places where one could think that you could ride out this fallout. Now, there's a national disaster medical system which moves patients, and the RITN is tied into this, where there is emergency decontamination happening at the site. There's triage systems, there's technical decontamination, which then there'll be medical centers and assembly areas where these patients will be surveyed, and then moving to a evacuation center with staging facility, and then delivering these patients to these definitive care hospitals. So it could be a trauma hospital, it could be a burn hospital, it could be these RITN centers, and then there's an outpatient setting. So our bit of this is basically a relatively small slice of the pie. So the casualties which will have trauma or combined injury are probably going to be the largest number of patients, and many of the written centers actually don't have burn centers. Probably most do have trauma centers. But those who have pure radiation without much trauma or burns would come to the RTN center, and the casualty numbers could be quite overwhelming, with 630,000 estimated from a 10 kiloton device. So our expectation then is that about 70% of these patients would be in the outpatient setting, 29% might need intensive care, and potentially a small number would, which really have total marrow-aplasia, might need a bone marrow transplant. So for the RITN centers per se, we're in the order of about 60,000 patients that we would plan to care for. So the RTN is a collaborative effort led by the NMDP, Be the Match, and ASTCT, with hospital preparing for the medical surge. And the hospitals, the idea is the hospitals will, near the center, obviously will be overwhelmed, and so these patients would be then dispersed across the country into these different RITN centers, and we would primarily focus on those patients with pure radiation injury. And this gap was identified by the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response at the time in the Office of Naval Research. So why bone marrow transplant in cancer centers? Well, we know that the bone marrow is the most sensitive organ. We do bone marrow transplants for blood cancers. We know that doses more than 2 gray can cause acute radiation syndrome. The acute radiation syndrome mix what we see daily taking care of these patients with blood cancer, and the patients are in fact given therapy to destroy their bone marrow, and failure to restore would obviously result in death. So the timeline of this is dated to the National Marrow Donor Program, which was set up in 1987. The Office of Naval Research started funding the NMDP in 1990, and HRSA began funding in 1991. So you look at a timeline below. Within the NMDP Office of Naval Research initial contract, there was a statement in there that the NMDP would be prepared for national medical disasters. And so in 2005, actually in 2001, the NMDP begins to develop the concept of RITN. In 2004, ASBMT joined this initiative. We had a meeting with Rear Admiral Vanderwagen, who was the ASPR at the time, Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, and officially established RITN in 2006, and we started preparing these guidelines. We have a MOU with the ASPR, and as you can see, we have since been included in the FEMA response, integrated in GeoHealth capacity, and worked with the federal government creating guidelines for cytokine and triage. Don't expect you to read this, obviously, but there are many, many medical transplant centers across the country, and we've been preparing. We've had over 881 exercises. These are all available on RITN.net. Almost 20,000 medical staff trained. We have about 20,000 doses of cytokines on hand. And this is a sort of a just-in-time rotating stockpile. We have somewhere about 3,000 inpatient beds, which we think could come in line within 24 hours, and about the same number of pediatric beds within 24 hours. There have been about 12,600 total blood stem cells conducted in 74 hospitals. So currently, the federal plans which involve RITN is in the White House Planning Guide for Response to Nuclear Detonation. We are in the FEMA Incidents Annex. We're in the ASPR Playbook, in the RADNUC All Hazards Plan. We are also in the State and Local Planners Playbook for Medical Response. We're in the ASPR Medical Planning Response Manual for Nuclear Detonation Incident. And in the National Library of Medicine, there's this Radiation Emergency Medical Management that we helped develop with a prototype for order sets for both adult and pediatric patients in the case of a radiation incident. So you can just cut and paste from these order sets. So we do have a capabilities report, which is ongoing. We collect RITN capacity support, so what the bed availability would be, and we can then share this with the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response. We do have a dashboard that is that is live, so it's a geospatial system that's updated daily. So you can see on the right-hand side the total number of beds that are potentially there and where these bed availabilities could be at any point in time. So our treatment guidelines are something that we've been working quite hard to try to develop a SOP for this. It talks about the principles of management, crisis standards, acute radiation syndrome, the casualty triage, the management of these patients, stem cell support, when to type, and other additional resources. The referral guidelines can be found in the website, www.ritn.net/treatment, and you can see the consultation criteria when to consider referring to one of these centers based on neutrophil count, lymphocyte count, and symptoms. This is what we've developed in terms of cytokine triage guidelines. Again, can be found on the web, where the dosage is dependent on what time the lymphocyte count was obtained. And the lymphocyte count is quite useful in terms of predicting the severity of the radiation. So it's basically a measurement of radiation dose, as well as assessing time to vomiting, giving a relatively useful tool to try to assess what patients could benefit from this. The other piece are adult medical orders, which can be found in the REM site, the Radiation Emergency Medical Management site, which is www.remm.hhs.gov. And these are both the adult hospital orders as well as a pediatric prototype order set. And we'll go over what potential events, whether you need internal contamination with decorporation agents or cytokines. We do conduct a yearly exercise, so there's a situation manual, and we also have an after-action review where we have a 10 kiloton nuclear device explosion in a particular area, and then we go through this exercise as it's happening in the situation manual. These are tabletop exercises. We also have had full-scale functional exercises. But now we have more than 15 years of exercise material. So the full-scale exercises really are getting patients to a site. So this has been done in several airports across the country where volunteers come and get screened and run through this whole situation manual as to where patients should go, are they decontaminated, what the next step would be in terms of getting them to a medical center or to a facility where they could get a blood count and be monitored as an outpatient. So we do have also a data set for medical grand rounds, what the role of the hematologist is. Again, we talk about the network, the potential scenarios, radiation biology, dosimetry, the acute radiation syndrome, mitigation and treatment, and what the available resources are. There are also just-in-time web-based training. So we introduce RITN, the basic radiation training, the concept of operations. We have a GETS card, which is a national system that allows you to call an 800 number and get connected via cell towers. So you can actually call using your cell phone to the system, which is more robust in the event where the majority of the cell services are no longer available. We also have a non-medical radiation awareness training for folks whose English is a second language. So these are all the events, all the efforts we've put into this. And then we have a YouTube page which talks about, again, just-in-time training, what you need to know this was developed in collaboration with Emory University. We have been collecting data since 2006 through the NMDP and then managed by the CIBMTR. These are really research forms. These are approved by the Institutional Review Board. And the concept here is that if something were to happen, we would want to collect this data as it's being developed so that we could actually learn to see what is happening to the patient, what kind of interventions were done, and potentially what the outcomes are. So some of the fields in these are demographics, the exposure level, what the organ function was, what the lymphocyte analysis showed, what the comorbidities were, patient trauma and illness, complete blood count, therapy, infectious prophylaxis. So the RITN has also been added to REACTS, which is the Radiation Emergency Assistance Center training site in Tennessee, and they are the national resource for patient events. And you can see we are tied into their app as well. We also have training for public health. We have a National Alliance for Radiation Readiness, radiation training modules for public health. So many of these have been developed so that this could be, again, just-in-time training. And this has been really a large collaborative group with many different partners which have helped us develop this treatment network. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but if you would like further information, you can feel free to drop me a note. It's at nelson.chow@duke.edu. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And this explains my next topic I will be presenting. It's autocracies, which taking as a heads up and being in control, fully in control, being in totalitarian state, you can do whatever you want. And once can unleash, presentation please, and once can unleash a war in the middle of Europe, in the middle of one's prosperous state. War, it's a political matter. It can be foreseen. Next, yeah, oh, no, it's a different direction. Yes, it can be foreseen, it can be predicted. Russia stuck 2014. It took occupied Crimea, it's occupied two eastern parts of Ukraine and constantly threatened to advance. They gathered more than 300,000 units, armaments on a border, and threatened to attack any time. Unfortunately, after a number of warnings from European partners, from American partners, Ukrainian political establishments, being leading by populist votes, decided not to respond, decided to look at the eyes of a dictator, Mr. Putin, decided to took all mines off the border, decided to disassemble most combatant troops, and decided to stop armament program for Ukraine. So we left one-to-one with a dictatorship. One-to-one, I mean Ukrainian people. And that our fate was in our hands. So being a cord blood bank, being in biotech center, we decided to put a plan forward, preparation for possible invasion, possible attack. Even at that time, it was very impossible. Everyone thinks so. Because to unleash most bloodiest war conflict in the middle of 20th century, 21st century, it was virtually impossible. But to be ready, to be armed, to be ready to strike back, this is the best preparation to answer attack and answer the dictator. So our plan was put in 6 main directions. First, of course, to secure physical protection of our personnel and our headquarters, our facility. Second, to secure deposit, to secure more than 28,000 families who entrusted us with their biological material, with their deposits. Third one, it's evacuation, because each military affects people, family, our employees, and evacuation is one of the crucial parts to save them. Fourth one, it's mobilization efforts, mobilization not just for the company, but what company can do for the country. IT security, which is very important nowadays, and of course, organization of work in the aftermath of invasion. So security. We had experience already 2014 invasion. We had some precautions, and we had on site our own security personnel. It was doubled, and before the war we decided to triple in case of invasion. We have additional armament purchased for our security personnel and body protection, which later become very, very handy. And of course, means of communication, how to control, how to communicate, how to influence. We have most of our cellular company mostly controlled by Russians, so we organize a special type walkie-talkie, military style, and special government program can communicate without cell communication, just using GMP standards. And of course, to provide shelter. Shelters on a site, it's not just digging deeper, but also to introduce a two-wall protocol, basically being two capital walls, which more protected when shells or missile might strike nearby. External reinforcements of facades, of a freestanding equipment, so it was enough bags for sandbags purchased, and we develop a protocol of what needs to be done immediately if attack would happen. Autonomy. Electricity supply, water supply, food, all of this needs to be provided. So energy generation facility we have already doubled, so it was tripled now. 3 months stock of food, water, basic sanitarian, food, and even some clothes were purchased and stored on a site just to be able to provide anything necessary for the company and for our employees. Additional provisional shelters for not just for security, but for personnel who might be caught on a site. And of course, contingency reserve was purchased for someone who would need our support from nearby settlements. Protective IT systems. We've been witness a number of DOS attacks, not only on the government facilities, but on the private enterprises who is stealing data, who is trying to get control of our databases. So it was special protection purchased, licensed spy software, protection spy software, banking style software, and double system or storage, each day storage duplicated all database, and also software which provide us possibility to store each day to duplicate on a cloud storage. Double encryption of databases already been introduced by that time, and additional electricity supply inverted time. So it's not electricity if we run out of fuel, for example, it was triple by that time. So we decided to have just accumulator who can keep our servers going. And again, communication means and control was introduced to be able to communicate in terms of further advancement of enemies. So nitrogen. Nitrogen, it's a blood for cryobanks. We have double our facility, our liquid nitrogen. It was enough tons to keep us going for 3 months, but nobody knows how long it might take. So we secure additional supply from suppliers, from producers, not from the eastern part where the massive industrial center is located, but from the west of Ukraine and even abroad. And we also prepaid some liquid nitrogen supply from our suppliers located inside the Kyiv city. So we have enough to our account to keep us going for half a year if something would happen more dramatically. And local authority later has become very useful, was very helpful to understand our needs and provide security and means of communication and supporting supply of liquid nitrogen, again, in case of something of this matter would happen. Before the invasion, after 2014 invasion, when it started, we already have negotiated with a couple of partners bank abroad, possibility to evacuate client sample and public samples abroad if it would be needed to protect them. But war have started, and even we were prepared, even we discussed it a number of times, but it came by shock, it came by surprise. Political leadership was not ready for war. Again, they knew it, but they decided not to reveal this knowledge to people and don't know people. Because next day, it was hundreds, thousands of men standing in enlisting offices. I'm sorry in advance, it's become more personal. So war zones was demilitarized, but people decided to fight. They get their pistols, they get their guns, they get their Molotov cocktails, and was ready to strike back. 3 days, it's most devastated, most crucial days for our company. We completely halted, we put complex on mothballed, and it was only security personnel on the site. Because of mobilization, we have 2 security guards who went to the military. We have all men went to territorial defense, but only 3 of them were actually applied to get it into territorial defense, so we had enough manpower on the site to protect and secure. Of course, we don't know who we will be dealing with. It might be looters, who knows? It might be forthcoming invaders' arms. Still, it was 3 days of total devastation, desperation, because in 3 days we have effectively guns, people, tanks at our doorsteps. Where's the mouse? Okay, here's a small dot. It's a Hammerfund, where's our headquarters, and over there is located over here. So effectively, it's not just shells, it's not just missiles, blows, but we can clearly see machine guns and fighting with just personal armament, which means it won't be far as 7 kilometers, 5 kilometers. We have a couple of groups fighting, just a couple of hundred meters from our headquarters. We have a couple of occasion bullets actually penetrate the walls. So evacuation was first on our mind. We need to protect our staff. Mostly out of 180 personnel, it's a women with children. And of course, they need to be safely relocated. 2 of our families stuck in notoriously known place, Bucha, Gostomel, which was completely destroyed. They were meant to hide in a basement with just basic supply. And it took us a fortune and some time to organize a evacuation to the safety and to put them in safety dwellings with other employees. We secure support from local territorial defense, which already been around the place. We had some trenches dig around our compound. We have plenty of mines located again, because we headquarters located on a hill. It's very, very useful for protection, and we located just off Circle Road from the northern side from Kiev, where the main advancement of Russian forces were coming. Bridges were destroyed, and it was very difficult to organize this. But nevertheless, all our families were safe in 3 days' times. Everything was in place, if you can say so, during wartime. We have one casualty. It used to be one of the directors, one of the companies belonged to the group, but she already left the company a few months in advance. But unfortunately, she left in Bucha and was killed by Russian forces. But life goes on. We have commitment, we have obligation, we have our facility, and we decided that we cannot stop. We need to provide. Maternity hospital, this one, 5 kilometers from our headquarters, was destroyed, but even though, women still giving births and children were delivered, and we were coming and collecting samples in 3 days' time. Believe it or not. So we decided to drag more trenches, create more shelters, and defend ourselves. We mobilize and do not give up, because it was our response, it was our fight. What has been done? Because we have a couple of guards listed to the armament forces, we and our logistics system was shrank because it was curfew introduced. We have people, drivers who come and help us to protect our headquarters. And the full-scale operational program, our program preparation, pre-war program being introduced. Physical protection, all sandbags were filled, all standalone equipment physically protected, all windows shuttered with wooden, with metal, and to protect not just inside our cryobank, not our GMP facility, but also all equipment, vital equipment, nitrogen equipment, equipment for air preparation, because GMP rooms were still running. We need to keep going. We have some samples, MSC culture growing, other cells growing. Everything was in control. So we established contact and collaboration with territorial defense, as I said, to support them, and they're supporting us. We established contact with armed forces who was located nearby, and providing all necessary support for them, to provide them shelter sometimes, to prepare hot food. We support volunteers, and later on it's payback, because we provide our big storage facility for equipment they needed, and later on we distribute those equipment for hospitals, for maternity hospitals, for clinics, for that one who is in need. Logistics service. It was very good and very wise decision a couple of years ago when we decided to set up our own cold chain logistics system. It was serving that time only Ukraine, some regions, but it's become very, very handy, because none of services were actually working. Most of people were barricaded, most of people installed with control point, block posts, and curfew was introduced. First 3 days was 24 hours curfew. Later it became less strong, but still nighttime, when we used to have service 24/7, we need to be abolished, but their service still was up and running. So we were ready, and we fulfilling our obligation to our clients, to our customers. Laboratory. We have family cord blood bank, we have public cord blood bank, we have our GMP grade research and production facility, we have our own logistics system, and all of this need to be maintained in control. So we have dedicated staff who were coming, even with absence of a public transport, were coming and spending a night, days on a site, just to provide enough support. Even, I later show you in a slide, with the distribution, massively number of our personnel left. Someone left abroad, someone left to Western Ukraine. with the more secure places. Previously prepared supply came very, very handy because we were able not to only feed, not to protect, but also provide sleeping places, shelters, food for those who is standing with us and who need it. So we are trying to organize control, comfort, provide some comfort, if you can say so, during war time. We have number of shells, number of missiles coming and constantly bombarding Kyiv, capital, and other cities which are located closer to the border, closer to the Russian border, and closer to the eastern part. So our plan was working good, and we were able to restore our work. Strategic supply of nitrogen was working. We even secured local authority providing police car escort to have our tanks coming, delivering liquid nitrogen on a site. And we were planning, okay, we fixed situation for now. We have warning, we have air warning 3-4 times a day, but we continue working, and we were able to provide some point of confidence, some point we can stand on and move on. This is what happened with our 180 people. 60% Western Ukraine, different places, relatives, hotels, but there is predominantly women and children. 30% went abroad, but not just resting, but they working online and participating with all means possible to keep company going. 10%, only 10% who stays in Kyiv now, and this 10%, they're providing all necessary work and support for the company. But Ukraine is not alone. Once, one of the prominent Ukrainian leaders said a long time ago that once it would be a time that all Ukrainians would be greeted with Slava Ukraine, and this is happening now. Wherever we're going, wherever we're meeting, it's again support. So all democratic world gathered together. And I should say that one of the first calls we received from abroad was from this association, Croat-Balt Association, asking what we can do for you. Because you need to reveal, you need to present, you need to provide eyewitness experience, and you need to initiate fundraising. This, I personally thank Croat-Balt Association, John, Alan, friends, because this was very, very handy. This came in time, and this would keep us going. These companies who voluntarily support us, who send their donation, provide different support, but there is a Croat-Balt Association, there is a Parents Guide for Croat-Balt, the Charité, leading German oldest and biggest clinic in Europe, Alumus, Estonian branch from Future Health Bank, New England Croat-Balt Bank, Regenerative Biologist Incorporation. I don't know those guys, really. And I really was touched, so did all of my team, all of my employees. It was what provided us insurance, and we realized that Ukraine has already won. Entire democratic world has united to fight against last standing 19th century empire, who's decided to invade, kill, rob, murder, steal, and be in control, which is impossible. As one of the democratic principle, it's a freedom. And freedom, free people never can be conquered and beaten by slaves. Ukrainians to continue to live, and for us to live, it's provide work, keep our obligation going, resume our work, provide places to work, get our employees possibility to be engaged, participate, pay taxes. Taxes, because war is the most expensive thing in the world. And we need to support our armament forces. Because Ukrainian armed forces is a political unit whose all Ukrainians support it now. This is what's happening right now. And the last few days' advancement, Ukrainian forces liberated territory of Ukraine being occupied by Russians, and the territory is more than 3,000 kilometers. So this is equal to one of the biggest European countries. Family cord blood banks working, operates. We reinstall the full line of product and services we had before the war. So we have all primarily processing for material collected during the birth. We have cultivation of MSC, and we have expanded our activity in logistics service. Because logistics service was, as I said, became very handy because nothing was working. It was impossible to deliver from A to B in Ukraine, and our drivers, our cars, our cold chain system was working, providing services even under the shells, even under the fire. We even expand our geographic coverage because few clients left abroad and asked their samples to be transferred, to be relocated, to be evacuated. And our cold chain center, logistics system became very, very handy, and we were able to move our samples. And using long-standing scientific collaboration with the Charité Clinic in Berlin, we moved a handful of deposits to the clinic with our own service, with our own tanks, and public cord blood bank samples were moved first, knowing that we would need them after the war, after our victory. Center of Excellence, QRCell Clinic. Stem cell clinic we established a long time ago with application of cord blood during operation with a newborn born with congenital heart diseases. We had a couple of presentations on the previous conferences, but to date it's more than 15 years of experience of application, more than 600 successful cases. And on the basis of this cooperation, we establish a clinic and have foreign clients, patients, local patients treated. When war have started, we tried to provide, to finalize all treatment we have started. For foreign clients, patients, it was impossible and not safety to come anymore, but with Ukrainian clients, for this reason, and most of them moved to Western Ukraine. We moved our clinic accordingly, and for a couple of months it was working over there, continue to apply technologies we have been developing. Even on these conferences, we have our poster report on an application, and some of them happened already during the wartime. So, natural disasters, war and other man-made disaster calamities. We cannot stop them, but we can foresee them. We can predict, we can plan. And if plan is deliberate, if plan is deep enough, you would be, of course, it's a shock, but 3-4 days, you put yourself together and you move on. And you knew that your preparation means something, not just for you, but for people who is around, people who leading, and people who lead. So, learn from experience of others is very important. Democracy has always and will always win over autocracy. This is what happened in this time. Not now, not by the end of this year, but sooner or later, last standing evil empire would collapse. And I hope and I truly wish that one of these conference in this room, conference room, would never experience something we had been through. But thank you for your support, because it's very important, because you are fighting with us and we will win. Thank you.